This is lesson 13, part 3, and we're continuing to delve into the topic of beat.
A very brief review of our staff and the notation elements we've learned. We're going to start with our treble clef. So we have a treble or G clef. We'll just start that on line 2, curly Q around line 2 and back up again. And this is called a G clef because this note right here is a G. From there, we can decode all the other letter names on the staff. The note I just drew is a whole note, and we could also draw a half note on space 3 with the stem going down on the left side. We could draw a bass clef. A bass clef or F clef starts on line 4, bumps up to line 5, half a heart, stopping just under line 2 with a dot in space 4 and 1 in space 3. If we were to draw a note head, and in this case it's a quarter note with the stem going down on the left, right on line 4, that's going to be an F, and from there we can decode all the other letter names, all the other pitches that we're going to see on the staff. We also learned about bar lines that help organize music. It's just a line going from the bottom to the top of the staff, and the area between bar lines is called a bar or a measure, and we can number those bars or measures, which then makes it easier for us to be able to play together and just be able to read music. As I've mentioned before, once these note and rest values are placed on a score, the composer is going to give us additional decoding information that's going to specifically assign beats to each of these note values. And the way they're going to do that is by assigning one of these note values to be the beat or pulse note. So for example, he could tell us that a quarter note is going to be worth 1 beat. Okay, from there we know that a quarter rest is also going to be worth 1 beat, and we can figure out everybody else's allotted beats. So we know now that a half note will get 2 beats, and a whole note will get 4 beats, and an eighth note will get half a beat, and a 16th note will get a quarter of a beat, right? And the rests will have their equivalent worth. So a 16th rest will be a quarter of a beat, okay? But it doesn't have to be that a quarter note is chosen as the beat note. Very often, a composer will actually say, let's make the 8th note. That's going to make more sense in this score. The 8th note's going to be the beat. So now we know this guy's 1. We know the 8th rest is 1 beat of silence now. And now again, we can figure out, well, then a quarter note gets 2 beats, and a half note gets 4 beats, and a whole note gets 8 beats, and a 16th note gets half a beat, okay? And then again, another common scenario would be that a half note would be given the beat. Any of these note values can and are chosen as the beat or pulse note depending on the score. But the most common tend to be, certainly in our cases, will be 8th note, quarter note, and half note.
In everyday life, we measure time in seconds, minutes, hours, recurring units of time. In music, we measure duration in beats or in subdivisions of those beats. Remember that beat is a recurring pulse. It is predictable and it is independent of anything else going on around it. Remember that rhythm, on the other hand, is dependent on a pulse to be fully realized once we see it on a page. One thing I don't think I've mentioned is that I just want to make clear that when we see note or rest values on a page, on a score, those are representing the rhythm. So we don't actually see the beat itself represented on the score in any which way. There might be a metronome marking, there might be a tempo marking of some kind, an Italian term or something like that to help us decide what the pulse is, but it's not actually notated on the score. So we have to keep track of that on our own. Remember that a metronome can be a really helpful tool when we're trying to externalize or internalize a pulse or the heartbeat of the music. It's very rigid, but obviously it's perfectly recurring. It's not entirely how we'll end up playing once we're performing without a metronome, because there will be a little more fluidity and ebb and flow to a pulse, just like our human heartbeat has some ebb and flow. But it's a good way of practicing. It's an important way of learning to be able to match pulse within an ensemble and it can help serve as a plumb line for our pulse or heartbeat. Remember that metronomes measure beats per minute. Also, composers will give us decoding information on the score that will help us know how to group the beats. So beats will always be grouped together. Common groups are 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9. And what that means is just that we want to emphasize the first of each group. So if he says they should be beats should be grouped into fours, we would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That 1 is called the downbeat. It's also the strongest beat in the measure. If he wanted them grouped into threes, the beats grouped into threes, we would say 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But the downbeat is always the most emphasized, the strongest beat in the measure. We're going to set our metronome on 90. It's going to be grouped into fours, so you'll hear some emphasis there. As always, I'm going to listen to that pulse first, then I'm going to start clapping. 1, 2, ready, clap. Now I'm going to say 2 4-beat notes. 1, 2, ready, go. Ba, ba. Let me do that again. 1, 2, ready, go. Ba, ba. So we're now going to try having some spoken sounds and rests. Remember that even though our mouth is going to be quiet during those rests, the beat continues. The beat is independent of what's going on around it. It continues no matter what. So we're going to say a 2-beat note, followed by a 2-beat rest, a 2-beat note, a 2-beat rest, a 2-beat note, a 2-beat rest. So we're going to do that pattern, 2 beats spoken, 2 beats silence. We're going to do it 3 times total. First, we're going to get our beat going. 1, 2, ready, clap. 1, 2, ready, speak. Ba, ba, ba. Do it again. 1, 2, ready, go. Ba, ba, ba.
Returning to Unit 2, which is our rhythm unit, Lesson 5, we're going to start reading where we left off. Rests can be beats too. Tap each of these notes, but don't tap the rest. Feel the pulse of the beat for the rest, but don't tap. So I don't love how Jay Althouse says this, but I think what he's getting at is, remember earlier today I said that any note value could be designated as the pulse note. In this case, he's saying a quarter note is a pulse note, which means that a quarter rest is also the pulse rest, I guess, if you want to think of it that way. He's saying that these are all equivalent to 1 beat, okay? So we're not going to quite follow his instructions because we know already that what we see here is not the beat. This is actually the rhythm. So we're going to get our beat going independent of this. We're going to set the metronome at 85. I'm going to tap. You can clap. And we're just going to get that going. Then we're going to put this rhythm in our mouths. So for the notes, we'll say ba, and for the rest we see, we're just silent. 1, 2, ready, clap. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, ready, speak. Ba, 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 ba. Continuing with review, if a quarter note gets 1 beat, how many beats are there in this measure? Okay, so we know a quarter note, first of all, is going to be equal to, well, we know this is a quarter rest, okay? And he says each of these is 1 beat. Okay, so this is 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1, so total of 4. If a half note gets 1 beat, how many beats are in this measure? Okay, so we know a half note will get 1 beat. We also then know that a half rest would get 1 beat, but I don't see any here. Okay, now, how are we going to figure out what these quarter notes should get? So I took the liberty of drawing our little teeny tiny pyramid here. This is really helpful to keep referring back to when you're first starting to read music. So we know it's very much just math logic. You have to think it through. This is 1 beat. So that means that a quarter note is a half a beat, right? Okay, so let's see here. This guy is gonna get 1 beat plus a half a beat plus another half a beat. So this is a total of 2, okay? If an 8th note gets 1 beat, okay, so let's just write that down, an 8th note. Also an 8th rest, these would be worth 1 beat, okay? How many beats are there in this measure? Well, he makes it pretty easy for us, right? Because they're all 8th notes. So 1 plus 1 plus 1, 3 8th note beats in that measure. Okay, getting a little more complicated. Let's see here. He says in the staff below, a quarter note gets 1 beat. Okay, so the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back up to my tiny little pyramid here, and I'm going to write a 1, so I remember that this is worth 1 beat, which also means the rest is worth 1 beat, right? He says place bar lines after every 3 beats. Okay, so I see he's using 8th notes, half notes, rest. We better figure this out. Okay, so if a quarter note gets 1 beat, a half note gets 2, a whole note gets 4, and an 8th note is going to get half a beat. So let's do some math here. Okay, we have 2 plus 1, and he said place bar lines after every 3 beats. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and add a bar line right here. Okay, now we know quarter note 1, and we have 2 8th notes together. That's actually a half plus a half, right? This is one reason they're beamed like that, so we can easily visualize that it's 1 beat. Okay, bar line. Half note is worth 2, quarter note 1, bar line. Okay, 1, quarter rest, 1, quarter note, 1, 1, quarter rest is worth 1, quarter note is worth 1, and remember we put it right at the end of the line. That's the correct way to do that. And our last example, in the staff below, a quarter note gets 1 beat. Okay, quarter note gets 1 beat. That's part of our decoding information. Place bar lines after every 4 beats. Okay, so again, I'm going to take the time to go, this is 1, which means this is 1. This is then 2, and this is then 4, and this is then half a beat. Okay, now I'm going to take a look here and do the math. So we have 1. Together, these guys are 1. Together, these guys are 1. And this obviously just a quarter note, 1. There we go, bar line, top to bottom. Okay, we have 1, quarter rest is 1, this is 1, and then we have, again, the group together, 8th notes, 2 of them together equal 1 quarter note, so we know that's 1. Bar line from top to bottom. Whole note is 4 beats all on its own, right? So we just are going to draw a bar line right away that has 4 beats in it all by itself. And then we have a half note. We know that's worth 2. And then each of these are worth 1. Bar line at the end. All right.